One of the spots for you.
Sit up here. I got you pocket and jump in. Oh, thank you. All right, and we are live, just so everyone knows.
Me, you have to be on our best behavior.
I'm sorry.
Get out of line.
I'll tell Linwood on you if you get out of line.
Oh, no, don't do that. I'm in enough trouble as it is.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Burdett, and this is a meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I'd like to ask Russell if he would open the meeting and make introductions or let them know what I'm doing sitting here, and then we can move on to a little bit of business.
Absolutely. So Ms. Burdett being nominated and gracefully accepting the chairmanship for the Historic Preservation Commission has requested just a general informational session to kind of go over the scope, the origin, and the mission and responsibilities associated with this board. So I think the city clerk has passed out some information for your review. We'll cover it as in detail or as high level as you wish. Hopefully we have a better understanding as we move forward the roles and responsibilities of staff, city manager, mayor and city council, and ultimately the Historic Preservation Commission. So as far as introductions, you all know your bios better than I do, so we'll start over here with Mr. Jerry. We'll let you just give a brief introduction of yourself, your background, and potentially maybe your interest in this particular commission.
Sure, I'll do that. I'm Jerry Adams. I've served on the city council for a number of years back in the 80s. Generally when this and the DDA and those things are being under consideration, so I'm interested from that perspective of seeing how it all grows. I'm a retired textile executive. I've worked for several companies, traveled a good bit internationally and nationally in my sales job, and just glad to be here. I guess I've been a citizen of Thomaston, grew up here. My ancestors came here in the 1820s, so love Upson County and Thomaston, Georgia.
I'm Walter Brown. I'm a native of Thomaston, and my working environment was with Thomaston Mills for 40 years as purchasing agent for the last 30. And I've been active in the Historical Society for the last 25 years, I guess, and I enjoy the history of the county, and where I'd like to see a lot of it preserved that we don't still have.
Let's go.
I'm Brenda Tabb, graduated from Auburn, also from Georgia College with a master's, wound up as a media specialist. I've been on this committee probably around 20 years, sometime after Walter. He was on here when I joined, but I'm not exactly sure what year it was. And I'm, of course, interested in the city of Thomaston. I was not born here, but my mother was, and her folks were, and just love the town.
My name's Claude Burgess. I'm originally from Lafayette, Georgia. Met my wife at Georgia Southern. Moved here. I have a degree in history. Worked for the archives for a little while. Taught history in high school. Working at the archives, got to meet the community, got to learn about it, see how beautiful it was, and it's a nice, rich history. So I believe in preserving that and making sure that it's beautiful for posterity. So thank you guys for letting me be on the board with you.
Okay. Well, so I'm Jameson Grammy. I know most of y'all here. I'm currently with the archives, and I'm not from here either. I was born in Griffin, so not too far away, raised in Fayetteville. I came here when I was looking for a position in archives. I was pursuing an archival studies degree at Clayton, and I instantly appreciated the history here because it was a mill town just like where my mom grew up in Manchester. So I think a lot of, my role here, working for the archives, we have people that come to us who own a building in the historic district, and they like to learn the history of it. So I was going to kind of talk a little bit about that today at James' request. So yeah, just happy to be here.
And I'm Jane Burdett. I moved to Thomaston in 2010. I live in the Silvertown Mill Village, and I'm a huge advocate for Silvertown and very proud of the fact that we're on the National Register of Historic Places. I fell in love with Thomaston when I went through the Mill Village. Mr. Briddy Dickens, who was very active in the archives, and Penny Cliff was here at that time, and he introduced me to Penny, and I've just been happy to be here ever since. And I see a lot of changes, a lot of rapid changes, and I see that we do have some really special places that we maybe want to preserve, for future generations. And I'd just like to be part of that, and I appreciate Russell asking me. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. If it pleases the chairman, first off, if you're not from North Georgia, one does not say Lafayette. I spent 6 years in Somerville, so very familiar with the Lafayette area. And it's R merchant, even though there's no R.
Exactly.
But anyway, Madam Chairman, so part of the role as the chairman is obviously to conduct the decorum and the process of the meeting, but also to call meetings, to address the chairwoman. I think that's how you say it. To call for the votes in any other matters associated with decorum. So if it pleases the board or the commission, at this time I would like to give you a general overview of the enabling legislation, the designation of the districts, the ordinance that empowers the commission, and some of the guidelines that set out the protocol for your consideration as we conduct business. Is that okay with y'all?
Please do.
We'll treat it more as an informal conversation, so if you want to follow along, if you have questions, if you want to redirect, or if there is anything of uncertainty or unclarity that we provide further details, please feel free to just chime in, and we'll try to do our best to answer it. So, you should have attached with your packet, mine's highlighted, yours, it starts with Chapter 58. So this is the enabling powers that are enumerated by the City Council via the City of Thomaston Code of Ordinances. I'm going to skip over and I'm going to hit some of the highlights. If you want to read them at your leisure, and if you have additional questions or clarification, you can submit them to the city clerk, or if you pick them up during the meeting, we'll be glad to answer. So, affirmation of existing codes all the way down to definitions. 58-3 is of pretty significant importance because a lot of the code in what your job entails ties back to the actual definition of the matter at hand. If you'll notice, I highlighted on mine certificate of appropriateness. Most of my tenure here and my interchange with the Historic Preservation Commission comes in the form of the issuance of certificate of appropriateness. Now what that means, and we'll get in farther in the code because it lays out a process, is anytime someone wants to make a material change, and that's another definition further in, a reconstruction, alteration of the size, shape, and facade of historic property, demolition or relocation, commencement of excavation, change in the location of advertisement, or the erection, alteration, restoration, or removal of any building within the district. So through the enabling legislation, we create a historic district. A geography, I believe Ms. Nichols has passed out the ordinance that established the district, so you can view it historically. We're in the spatially, I'm sorry, not historically. We're in the process of uploading that to our GIS system. So what I would like to make available not only to the commission but to the citizen is an interactive tool on our website where you could punch in a property and it'll tell you not only, where the parcel is, what the parcel number is, but also which council district it's in, the appropriate zoning for the property, and then whether or not it does reside in a historic district. So, once the district is established, before property owners are able to make a material change as defined by the code, they have to submit to the Historic Preservation Commission a set of plans whereby they request you to issue them a certificate of appropriateness. So if I own a downtown business and I want to make a structural change, or change in architecture, or if I want to do a demolition, or if I want to, alter the improvement in any way, I have to submit those plans to the Historic Preservation Commission. City staff, through its building official, is prohibited from issuing permits to that particular property owner until such time you issue a certificate of appropriateness. What we're looking for is that any type of change that is requested by the property owner substantiates and has some flow or connection to the aesthetic and the historical integrity of the property. Like, we don't want to change that, right? So whatever type work that you're requesting to do, we want to verify through this commission that the work is acceptable, and the grace or the blessing of that comes in the form of a certificate of appropriateness. Once a person has applied, you issue the certificate, then the city building official will issue a permit for them to do that work. And then our charge on the city end is to make sure that that work is done in accordance, not only with the building code, but also in accordance with the plans and the certificate that's issued by this commission. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions about certificates of appropriateness?
So when somebody comes to apply for a building permit, if they're within the district that we're charged to look after, is that when they are sent to the Historic Preservation Commission at that point?
It depends, and a lot of those guidelines are enumerated here in the code, and we'll get to that. Because a lot of times structural changes or other permittable type work, whether it be wiring, HVAC, plumbing, roofing, all of that requires a permit. It's only going to come before historic preservation if there is a material change, right? So repairs are exempt. Like anything, there's a specific provision in here that addresses interior modifications. So you have no jurisdiction over interior modifications. You're mainly outside structure, its appearance, and the architectural design. What they do inside, while it may require a permit for plumbing or electrical or even structural inside, that's not going to require the certificate. So we try to, on city staff side, make that call based upon the type of work that's being completed, and more recently we just err on the side of caution. If there's any chance that it could cause a material change, we try to run that through HPC. So the building official normally is the medium that makes that decision, and he'll bounce it off me before we try to convene the commission to make that determination.
And on that, sort of along that same line, can you just give me a explanation of what you consider contributing and non-contributing, which I saw on the map. Some have black dots and some don't.
All right, so you are also empowered in the code, and I can't put my finger, but I read it earlier. So you have the authority to establish districts, and you have the authority to identify specific properties, right?
Right.
So I would think that the black dots are where previous historic commissions have identified properties. Okay, has everybody got a copy of this? This one right here. So these are some specific facilities that have been laid out due to their historic significance within the district. Specifically, the R.E. Lee Institute Historic District. You see the Weaver Dallas House. It goes 1 through 12, right? So all of those properties have been specifically identified for their historical significance. And I was making a note on here just for your future research and edification, the Weaver Dallas House probably would be a good idea to send code enforcement by. It looks kind of shabby. Maybe that's just me. Have y'all noticed? Do we have structural issues?
The lady that.
I was doing a ride around yesterday, and I was like, Bob, you probably need to write them a ticket. He's like, well, that's the Weaver Dallas House. So, if we do have some of those structures, the old gym, right, it needs to be torn out. Looks really bad. If it's the gym I'm thinking
I'm
about.
sorry, Russell, what?
The old gym.
Here?
Let's just.
The Holston one or
The one that we store stuff in.
yeah,
By
okay.
the cemetery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Bad repair.
Yeah.
The old Methodist church, the sanctuary, the secondary building was actually noted in our DDA revitalization plan as the definition of substandard structure and or blight. Right? So we've got some problems with some of these historic structures. But anyway, if you follow throughout the documentation that Ms. Nichols had posted to your specific question, there's a little bit of a write-up on these individual properties and why they're historically significant and why they were identified by the Historic Preservation Commission. Any other questions on certificates of appropriateness or the specific properties that were called out with regards to their historic significance?
And you said the DDA had made recommendations on some of that property, or no?
No, the DDA has commissioned an urban planning group to come in and do a downtown master plan,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So the impetus is to apply to the Department of Community Affairs for a rural area designation, which the legislator created special tax incentives for state tax liability for communities that have undergone some level of study, recommended via SWOT analysis, leakage study, market study. All of that ties into historic elements of old downtowns, particularly rural. And in part of this urban plannings group's analysis, we had a presentation on it the other day. I just noticed that they had a picture of that building, and they were like substandard blighted property. So, yep.
Did I hear you say that the old gym needs to be torn down? Did you say that?
Structurally, I would say yes.
And the same with the,
I'm not saying they
attached
said that
building.
one needed to be tore down. I've been in it. I think it has good bones, but you know, it's got plywood structures in the windows. Probably hadn't been painted in 40 years.
Does that church use that building for anything?
I'm unaware. I don't believe so.
Yeah, and it's not as old as you would think it is. I found an article about it the other day about when it was built in 27. So I was a little surprised by that. I thought it was older.
It's pretty old, James.
Does the city own it?
This building's older.
No, the city does not own
Is
it.
it still owned by the Methodist Church?
Yes.
No, it's owned by the Episcopal Church.
So the
Oh, it's
Episcopal.
the
yeah,
Episcopal.
sorry, not
Okay,
Methodist.
sorry. Yeah, please. Keep your denomination straight.
Since we're talking about that, that building, Russell, clarify for me how our responsibility in whether it's torn down or not, that would be a city decision, right? Whether it has, whether it's condemned or torn down.
It depends. Properties within the historic district that are owned by the government need not achieve a certificate of appropriateness. So if the city or the county owns a building in the historic district and they want to tear it down,
Courthouse is an example.
all they have to do is give you 30, 45 days notice. They don't have to come before the commission. They don't have to get any type of certificates, via the city ordinance, they would have to post a demolition bond, but they're not bound by the commission. Properties that are not government owned, they do have to come before the historic preservation and receive some sort of certificate prior to demolition.
And I'm going to suggest too that there are so many moving parts to this, and there's so many other outside influences on all of our historic pieces or property or districts or whatever. And that's something that I think that we can meet and talk about, and that we need to meet and talk about it, even outside of a regular called meeting. I believe that the bylaws, which I don't have a copy of, but Oasis is going to try to find that for me, will kind of set out, we can have meetings together, maybe have lunch, talk about things like this and how we proceed, because we don't want to be caught flat-footed or just be reactionary. Somebody calls and needs a building permit and we go through that process, because we're perceived as sort of the enemy, and we really need to change that perception as well. So I'd like for us to not only be cohesive, but to be knowledgeable, so we can answer the questions and have options, and we know we can't always say yes, and we know we're not always going to be a rubber stamp. So we just, those are things we need to talk about, and we can do that definitely in another meeting, I think. And thank you so much, Russell, for being willing to help us.
Can I ask one more question,
Yes.
Russell? Would you clarify for me contributing and non-contributing? I'm not sure I understood the definition of those two.
Probably the lawyer wrote them.
Who put those dots there?
I say the dots.
What section are you on talking?
I was just looking at this. It's got dots, black, clear dots on it, and
Hold on, I can probably find you an answer.
you had mentioned contributing and non-contributing, and I wasn't quite clear on the definition of those two.
Is somewhere in the code.
If you don't know off the top of your head, we can look it up.
I can find it. I read it in here somewhere. There's criteria for, and it could be just the factors that are deemed by this commission to be of significant historic interest. Then you have the authority to empower those based on description and logic. And then once enacted by the council, it therefore, becomes a formal designation by the commission.
We can find out later. I don't need to hold up a meeting for that, but.
And I don't mean to get you off track, Russell, but I'd like to know, how do you see us helping with the revitalization of downtown? We know we want a younger, better feel, look, but at the same time, how can we help the city with that? I mean, what's your vision for what it should look like?
I think that the whole basis for creating a historic district is due to preservation, right? A lot of times, contemporary and historic don't necessarily match, but I think the latitude that the commission has from prohibition against alterations on the interior, where you can have a more contemporary interior, right, but you still preserve that historic facade. I think that's kind of our goal. One of the things that you can do for me is to have a consistent basis on what constitutes material change. Just from a bird's eye view, when I look at downtown signs and sign permits that may have come before historic preservation or not, I see lit signs, right? Have lights in them, big, bright. To me, that's not historically significant, right? That probably didn't exist back then. looks good, it's contemporary, it's what everybody's doing. Probably not historic. Probably shouldn't have got a certificate of appropriateness. You know, things like that. And some of the things that you may not have the authority to regulate that we may or may not can permit, but we're looking at making some changes to our sign permit, like neon open signs. Are they historically significant? Are Christmas tree lights stapled around your windows historically significant? You know, some of these things that probably don't jive with historic district, that we can maybe take a deeper look when we actually look at issuing the certificates.
Thank you.
Y'all have any more questions? These are some good ones. No? All right. If not, we'll move on. 58-27 sets out the terms for your membership, appointments, terms, and compensation. I think that's...
Oh, we get compensated?
Well, I mean, it says you don't, but they wrote it in. So, 58-27, I think is C subsection 1 through 15, actually gives you the 15 areas where the commission is empowered, and it's kind of your scope of work is detailed within those 15. You'll see that number 3 is to review the applications for the certificate of appropriateness. Item number 1, and if I'm not mistaken, item number 1 is out of date and needs to be completed and submitted to the state of Georgia. I think the last time we did that was maybe in the 90s. We are in the process of hiring an economic development coordinator for the city, and I have written the job description as to encompass not only DDA and Main Street and general economic development activities, but I have given them the legwork for historic preservation. So one of the things I'm going to be charging that person with is to meet with HPC and try to conduct number 1. I think it's a $15,000 or $20,000 project. If you consult with one of these groups, they come out, they do your inventory, and they bring you into compliance. So, working on number 1.
This is sort of what we're working off of, which was, I believe, 1998.
Here you go.
There you go.
So I don't know that those design guidelines have changed, and I think the design guidelines is kind of the litmus for your determination of the certificate of appropriateness. But we actually have to have a properties inventory, and we need to get that done. 4 is where you get to recommend to the council the designation of any place, right? We talked about the dots, the places of significance. District site, buildings, structures, objects, or works of art. Promote acquisition by the city of facade easements to conserve and conservation easements. That's tied to an OCGA state law. The DDA is in the process of writing a city facade grant program that we would hope to make available to our members of our DDA, a lot of which is in the historic district. And you can read 7 through 15, and if you have any questions about those specific action items or empowerments, we'll do our best to answer.
I know the answer to this, but if somebody applies for DDA funding, they can also, if it's in the district, apply for historic funding as well. Is there a possibility to get 2 grants if you're a business moving into town?
Well, the city doesn't offer any type of historic incentive. I do know that there are historic tax credit projects that one could do, and they can be either state or federal tax credits. But those aren't city programs. Our control would be that if we offer a DDA funding mechanism via facade grant, that facade and design before eligibility is considered the HPC would have to buy off on the design, right? So we're gonna offer a $5,000 facade grant, but you gotta put in another $5,000, and the condition is the improvement has to be approved by HPC.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're putting our money in, so we get a little bit of aesthetic control over what you do with your facade, if you want the money.
Yeah, I was just reading number 9 there, which says that you can seek out local, state, tax, federal, and private funds for historic preservation. I just wanted to, in my mind, get it that they could go both ways, if it's available DDA or if there's a money through the state for historic preservation that could also
Absolutely.
win in both situations is what I'm asking.
If they're eligible, I don't know that the state would have any facade grants per
Yeah,
se. It
yeah, I
comes
understand.
more in the form of tax credits, I think. Rules and standards, you have the authority to create your own policies of decorum. Most ad hoc or formal commissions or boards by the city subscribe to Robert's Rules of Order. 58-30 is the conflict of interest. There should be abstention and a non-participation in discussion if there arises a conflict of interest. You do have the authority to receive funding. They are public meetings subject to Georgia's sunshine laws, open meeting laws, because any formal appointed board of the mayor and council is subject to open meetings. So anything you say or conduct or documents that are executed are subject to discovery. 58-56 is research by the commission mandated to conduct a survey of local historical resources. That's what we were discussing a while ago. We have to conduct that survey and submit it to the state of Georgia. The authority to recommend districts and buildings to the city council for designation. This probably ties back to your black dot. If there are specific districts or buildings that you think should receive consideration, then you have the authority to recommend that to council for formal adoption. C, documentation of proposed design. Goes into the details of the designation of districts. More of the same in 58-57 talks more about the districts. If you'll see C, the evaluation of the properties, how they're classified, how the historic contributes to the district, whether it's non-historic or intrusive. Designation of properties is enumerated in 58-58. And a lot of these items are legalese. I didn't really get into that. C is probably important, where public hearings are required. City Commission and City Council hold a public hearing on any proposed ordinance for the designation. So if you do have a district that you want to designate, there's a public hearing requirement. And a lot of this ties back to the state law, which authorizes local historic commissions. Do you see anything as interesting? The authority to issue moratorium on applications for alterations and demolition while ordinance of designations are pending. If you had a particular district in consideration for designation, you can issue moratorium, which would prohibit future permits for alterations until such time as the district has been designated. More public hearings, authority to seek technical advice if you do so need that. Process for denying certificate of appropriateness. 58-92 is the Hardship Clause, and you can read that. Where by reason of unusual circumstance, the strict application of any provision of this chapter would result in the exceptional practical difficulty or undue hardship upon any owner of specific property. So if there's a request for a certificate of appropriateness and otherwise, it would not be granted if there's an undue hardship created, and that can be consideration for a variance. One of the things we look at in consideration, not from a historical context, but from other ordinance requirements, has to do, in downtown environments with regards to, say, grease traps. All right, so you're a restaurant in downtown and city code requires you to have X size grease trap, right? Well, you don't have anywhere to put it, right? You don't have a parking lot you can dig up, so we have to make some exceptions due to either undue hardship or the specific geography and footprint of buildings. So that's your variance and your hardship provision. Conformance with the certificate, that is city staff's obligation to make sure if the certificate is issued, that work is followed in compliance. 5897 is an appeal process. 5896 deals with the acquisition of property. 5898, you have the authority to deny demolitions or relocations if you find that a property is historically significant and somebody wants to demolish it, then you can deny that request. And that about wraps it up. I feel like I've been speaking a lot, I've talked really fast and said a lot of things. But the general guideline in layman's terms are you are the protectors of the historic structures within the city that are designated within a particular district. If somebody wants to change that as defined in the code, they have to come and get permission from this body.
In that instance, let me ask you a question. You know Woody, obviously, Woody Heath. He asked me if his building, the train depot.
I don't believe it's in the historic district.
Sorry?
I don't believe it's in the historic district.
I couldn't see it on the map here. He wants to do a farmer's market, and he asked me if I'd check with the Historic Preservation Committee. I don't see it on the map, so it falls back to, is that acceptable under city ordinance for?
It would just be a straight zoning question. Right?
Yeah, exactly, but it's not under this that I said.
You're talking about the old train depot?
Yes.
I think it might be. I'm looking,
I don't think it is.
Not on the map, but it may be.
okay. For some reason, I was thinking it was that top one.
I'm going to build you a cool computer tool where you can just type it in.
That would be great. Well, I'm looking at the design guidelines that Jane has, and it has that inventory of buildings that's included, and it's on there. So I don't know.
We'll find out.
Okay.
That does raise an interesting question, doesn't it? Because when you think about the fact that the old train depot.
Well, and
yeah.
I will say that just because a building is identified as a historic structure doesn't necessarily constitute this in the historic district.
Right.
So the powers would be tied to the district, not to the structure, I think.
I think you're right.
But the I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen. Go ahead, Jameson. Sorry.
Page 38. That's essentially what I'm talking about. It says this section addresses the present physical appearance of all buildings in the downtown Thomaston Historic District, and the first one. Is that it?
It sure is.
Map could be wrong.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. 218 North Center Street. It does look like it, doesn't it? But I'm not positive either. Yeah. So in that vein, can an owner come to HPC and say, "Hey, can we designate?" Say the owner of the depot. Maybe he would like for it to have historic preservation recognition, could an owner come and say, hey, can you designate me as historic? And we could bring that, would we bring that to the city council then?
Sure. I think there's guidelines, and a lot of that jargon that we skipped over kind of outlines that process, but absolutely. But just because a structure is locally designated, it doesn't necessarily go on the state register or the national register. Those are completely different steps.
Would it not make sense that if, I was thinking about this, would it not make sense that if something is on the National Register of Historic Places, that it wouldn't automatically become a historic district as far as the local government is concerned?
Perhaps, but we specifically promised the residents of Silvertown there would be no local control.
They haven't met me.
That question was
right.
raised because we said this is going to be a catalyst for local control, and everybody said that's not what we're going for.
No, that's absolutely not. It's recognition, not regulation. Now, if we were a rich town and we, had, lots of money and people wanted to have regulation, we could have a homeowners association or that type thing. But we're not, and we don't foresee that.
But absolutely, it could.
Right, or somebody that just has a piece of property that they, want to see. But there are so many moving parts and so many different organizations and so many ways to get grant money that's what we might be able to even help with that. We've been around the block a time or two, and some of us are not familiar with that grant process, but it doesn't mean that we can't help the city get some grant money for historic preservation. And as a certified local government, that's really part of what we should be helping with, in my opinion. So we're here to help.
Good deal.
We appreciate you. And thank you for all you do for the city.
Do y'all have any questions? Did I bore you to death?
I probably got 1,000 on there.
Right. So we drill down to those maybe, and because we may all have the same questions, we just phrase it differently. So maybe we can come up with get together and come up with some questions. But we thank you so much for going over that, and I'd like to thank Councilwoman Reeves for being here. Thank you so much. It's good to see you, and we appreciate you. If it's pleases the board, or Russell, if you're through, I'd like to move on to a little bit of business.
Absolutely.
We do need to approve the minutes of the last meeting. And if everybody has a copy of that or got a copy of it on their email, do I hear a motion to approve the meetings?
It's written.
All right. Second?
Second.
Okay. All agree? Anybody? Okay. All right. So approve the meetings of the March 31st meeting, 2021. Have been approved. And I don't see any need to do a roll call because we've sort of all had our say, and I appreciate everybody being here today. Russell, can you give us a update on the English's Cafe?
I don't have one. From my understanding, from a code issue, it's tied to health and safety, structural integrity. Actually, one of the proper means for substandard structures, not saying it is to board up windows when they're broke. Really, the only technical violation is the exterior treatment of the wood's not covered. We could require it to be painted. But other than that, it's, I don't know what the property owner's long-term vision is.
And how long would we let that stay that way?
As long as it's structurally sound, I don't know that you have any recourse.
I don't know. So we couldn't bring any pressure to bear to get that
I mean, you know, you can call them, you can ask them, you know, we could compel them to paint it. They could paint it pink. They'd be well within their right.
Jane mentioned to me yesterday that the certificate of appropriateness for what they want to do has expired. So does that mean if they want to do anything to that
means
building, they have to
before
start
we
over?
would- That means before we would issue them a permit, they would have to readdress the commission. Have y'all heard anything? You know, I have to look at it from a code compliance standpoint.
Well, I think there are lots of rumors flying around that I don't think anybody really knows what the deal is, whether or not the insurance company could compel them to make those repairs, or I'm sure there's an insurance company involved in it, and there must be a mortgage holder involved in it.
Yeah, I'm not privy to that.
Right, so,
We can do a little digging, I'll see what I can find.
because normally if you have a mortgage holder, the check is made payable to the mortgage holder to sort of force those repairs, but it just, you know, we have done our job, I believe, and then if that changes, then will they come, if they decide not to use the certificate of appropriateness for what they asked for, will they then come back to HPC for a different certificate of appropriateness?
Depends on what they want to do. You know, if they want to put it back like it was prior to,
Mhm.
probably not. If they want to change it from its original appearance, then yes, they would.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? So we appreciate it very much, and we're going to hopefully get together outside of this venue and learn what we're up to, and with your guidance, and we appreciate it very much.
Yes, ma'am. Call me if you need me.
I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All right, meeting adjourned. Donuts for everybody.
Somebody second the motion.
Oh, yeah, somebody second, please.
The homeless.
We didn't vote, right?
All approved.
Everyone's standing.
I don't know. I was ruling on order.
I'm gonna go turn us off live.
Okay. Yeah, my Robert's rules are a little rusty.
I used to know more about them than I do now. I had to look that up.
I did too,
Too awful long
absolutely.
ago.
We used to live
Absolutely.
on the